In the quiet suburbs of Millbrook, retired detective Marcus Kane thought his days of uncovering dark secrets were behind him. But when a mysterious envelope slides under his door at 3 a.m. containing photographs that shouldn't exist and a note that reads, "They killed him for what he knew," Marcus realizes that some secrets are too dangerous to stay buried. What he discovers next will shake the foundations of everything he believed about power, corruption, and the price of truth in a world where the wealthy play by different rules. The rain hammered against the windows of Marcus Kane's modest two-bedroom house as he sat in his favorite leather chair, nursing his third cup of coffee and staring at the envelope that had appeared under his door hours earlier. At 62, Marcus had seen enough in his 35 years as a detective to know that anonymous packages rarely brought good news. His weathered hands, scarred from countless investigations, trembled slightly as he examined the manila envelope for the 100th time. The envelope bore no return address, no postmark, nothing to indicate its origin. Just his name written in careful block letters across the front. Marcus had been retired for 2 years now, living quietly in Millbrook, a sleepy town where the biggest crime was usually teenagers spray painting the water tower. He'd moved here specifically to escape the darkness he'd encountered during his years working homicide in the city. Yet somehow, that darkness had found him. Inside the envelope were 12 photographs and a single sheet of paper. The photographs showed what appeared to be a luxurious estate somewhere tropical, with palm trees swaying in ocean breezes and marble statues positioned throughout manicured gardens. But it wasn't the beauty of the location that made Marcus's blood run cold. It was the people in the photographs. Powerful individuals he recognized from newspapers and television. People whose names were whispered in the corridors of influence, all gathered at what seemed to be some kind of exclusive gathering. The note was brief but chilling. Detective Kane. They killed Dr. Jonathan Whitmore for what he discovered about Shadow Haven Island. The files he died protecting are hidden where only you can find them. Trust no one in uniform. They're watching. A friend who remembers justice. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore. Marcus remembered that name from news reports 6 months ago. A prominent psychologist who had supposedly died in a car accident on a rainy night, his vehicle plunging off a bridge into the cold waters of Riverside Creek. The official report had been straightforward. Wet roads, poor visibility, tragic accident. But Marcus had worked enough cases to know that sometimes the most obvious explanation was a carefully constructed lie. He walked to his study and pulled out a box of old case files he'd kept despite his retirement. His fingers traced through manila folders until he found what he was looking for. A thin file he'd started on unusual deaths in the area, but never had time to properly investigate. Whitmore's death was there, along with 3 others over the past 2 years, all ruled accidental. All involving people who had access to sensitive information about wealthy and powerful individuals. Marcus poured himself a glass of whiskey and settled back into his chair. Through his window, he could see the lights of Millbrook twinkling in the distance, peaceful and innocent. But peace, he had learned, was often just ignorance wearing a comfortable mask. He thought about his late wife, Sarah, who had begged him to leave the dangerous cases alone, to focus on simple crimes with clear solutions. She'd been gone 3 years now, taken by cancer, and sometimes Marcus wondered if the stress of his work had contributed to her illness. The photographs spread across his coffee table seemed to mock the quiet life he'd tried to build. Each image told a story of privilege and secrecy, of a world where normal rules didn't apply. In one photo, he could make out what appeared to be a private airstrip. In another, a massive yacht anchored in crystal blue waters. But it was the final photograph that made his detective instincts scream. It showed a man who looked remarkably like Dr. Whitmore, very much alive, standing on a beach that matched the other images. Marcus reached for his old phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Detective Lisa Chen, his former partner who still worked in the city. Lisa was one of the few cops he trusted completely, someone who had never been swayed by political pressure or financial incentives. If anyone could help him navigate whatever dangerous waters he was about to enter, it was her. But as his finger hovered over the call button, he remembered the warning in the note, "Trust no one in uniform." Marcus set the phone aside and walked to his kitchen where he kept a bottle of prescription pills that helped him sleep. Tonight, however, sleep would not come easily. He had a decision to make: ignore the envelope and continue his quiet retirement, or pick up the badge he'd symbolically laid down 2 years ago and follow this trail wherever it led. The wind outside seemed to whisper Sarah's voice, reminding him of promises he'd made to leave the darkness behind. But looking at those photographs, Marcus knew that sometimes a man couldn't choose his battles. Sometimes the battles chose him. He thought about Dr. Ciose's for Axie opener, Whitmore, about the other names in his file of suspicious deaths, about the powerful people who seemed to operate above the law. Marcus opened his laptop and began typing. If he was going to investigate this, he would do it right. He created an encrypted email account and began documenting everything: the photographs, the note, his initial observations. He uploaded copies of everything to a secure cloud server, just as he'd learned to do during his final years on the force when digital evidence had become crucial. The first photograph showed a large group of people gathered around what appeared to be some kind of ceremony or ritual. The image quality wasn't perfect, but Marcus could make out faces that would be familiar to anyone who followed politics or business news. There was something ceremonial about their positioning, something that suggested this wasn't just a casual social gathering. As dawn broke over Millbrook, Marcus made his decision. He opened his closet and pulled out the gun safe he'd hoped never to open again. Inside was his service weapon, still clean and maintained despite his retirement. Next to it was his old badge, tarnished now but still bearing the weight of all the cases he'd solved, all the justice he'd tried to deliver in an often unjust world. Marcus Kane was about to become a detective again, whether the world wanted him to or not. But this time, he would be working without the protection of a police department, without backup, without any safety net except his own experience and instincts. The photographs on his coffee table seemed to shimmer in the morning light, promising answers to questions he hadn't even thought to ask yet. He made a pot of strong coffee and settled in for what he knew would be a long day of research. Somewhere out there was an island called Shadow Haven, and on that island were secrets that someone had killed to protect. Marcus had spent his career following evidence wherever it led, even when it led to uncomfortable truths about people in power. He wasn't about to stop now. The first step would be identifying the location in the photographs. The architecture looked distinctly Caribbean, and the vegetation suggested somewhere in the tropical Atlantic. Marcus had contacts in various government agencies, people who owed him favors from his years of service. It was time to call in some of those debts. But first, he needed to understand what Dr. Whitmore had discovered and why that discovery had been worth killing for. Marcus pulled out a legal pad and began making notes, just as he had on countless investigations before. At the top of the page, he wrote, "Shadow Haven Island, what did Whitmore know?" As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across his living room, Marcus Kane prepared to dive back into the darkness he'd tried so hard to leave behind. But some darkness, he was beginning to understand, was worth confronting, especially when lives hung in the balance and justice demanded a voice. The photographs would be his map, the note his compass, and his decades of experience would be his guide. Whatever secrets lay hidden on Shadow Haven Island, Marcus Kane intended to uncover them, even if it killed him. 3 days after receiving the mysterious envelope, Marcus Kane found himself driving through the rain-soaked streets of downtown Baltimore, heading toward a meeting that could either provide crucial answers or get him killed. His research had led him to Alexandra Alex Rodriguez, a freelance investigative journalist who specialized in exposing corruption among the wealthy elite. Alex had been following stories about powerful individuals and their connections to various offshore properties, including several Caribbean islands used for private gatherings away from public scrutiny. Marcus parked his old Honda Civic in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district, checking his rearview mirror for any signs that he'd been followed. 3 decades of police work had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that he was walking into dangerous territory. But the faces in those photographs haunted him, especially the image of Dr. Whitmore apparently alive on that beach. Alex Rodriguez was waiting for him inside a 24-hour diner that smelled of grease and coffee, her laptop open and surrounded by folders thick with documents. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her early 30s, with the intense eyes of someone who had seen too much too soon. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the kind of unremarkable clothing that helped her blend into crowds when she needed to gather information unnoticed. "Detective Kane," she said as he approached her booth in the back corner. I have to admit, when you contacted me about Shadow Haven Island, I thought it was too good to be true. Debut! I've been trying to get solid evidence about that place for 2 years. Marcus slid into the booth across from her, noting how she kept glancing toward the door. You know about the island? Know about it? I've been obsessed with it. Alex opened one of her folders and spread several documents across the table. Shadow Haven Island is officially owned by a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The shell company is owned by another shell company in Panama. That one's owned by a trust in Switzerland. Following the money trail is like chasing smoke, but I've managed to track down some interesting connections. She pulled out a map showing a small island roughly 30 miles southeast of Nassau in the Bahamas. The island appeared to be about 2 miles long and half a mile wide, with what looked like a small harbor on the eastern shore and a landing strip cutting across the center. The island was purchased in 2015 for $47 million, Alex continued. Since then, there have been massive construction projects. A main house that's essentially a mansion, guest cottages, entertainment facilities, and that private airstrip you can see in the satellite images. But here's where it gets interesting. She pulled out a series of photographs that looked like they'd been taken with a long-range lens from a boat. The images showed the same locations Marcus had seen in his mysterious envelope, but from different angles and apparently taken at different times. I managed to charter a fishing boat and get close enough to take these pictures about 6 months ago, Alex explained. The island has serious security. Patrol boats, armed guards, the works, but I was able to document some of the people who visit there regularly. Marcus studied the photographs, his pulse quickening as he recognized several faces. How often do these gatherings happen? From what I've been able to determine, there's a major gathering every 3 months, usually lasting 4 to 5 days. The guest list includes politicians, business leaders, judges, media executives, people with serious power and influence. They fly in on private jets, and everything is handled with absolute secrecy. Alex leaned forward, lowering her voice. But here's what really caught my attention. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore was working on a research project about psychological manipulation and control techniques used by powerful groups. His work focused on how wealthy elites use psychological pressure and blackmail to maintain power over politicians and other influential people. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to click into place. You think Shadow Haven is some kind of blackmail operation? I think it's more sophisticated than that, Alex replied. Based on Whitmore's research and what I've been able to piece together, I believe Shadow Haven is where powerful people gather to engage in activities that would destroy their careers and reputations if they became public. The activities are filmed and recorded, creating leverage that can be used to control these individuals for years. She pulled out a thick folder marked Whitmore Research and opened it carefully. Inside were photocopied pages of what appeared to be academic research, psychological profiles, and detailed notes about behavior modification techniques. Whitmore wasn't just studying this academically, Alex continued. He was building a case. These notes show that he'd identified a pattern of behavior among certain political and business leaders, people who had suddenly changed their positions on key issues, made decisions that seemed to go against their established beliefs, or voted in ways that surprised everyone who knew them. Marcus scanned through some of the documents, his detective mind automatically cataloging the information. He thought they were being blackmailed. More than that, he thought he'd identified the source of the blackmail. Alex pointed to a page covered with Whitmore's handwritten notes. Look at this timeline. Every person on this list attended a gathering on Shadow Haven Island within 6 months of changing their behavior dramatically. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Alex and Whitmore were right, then Shadow Haven Island wasn't just a private retreat for the wealthy. It was the operational center of a blackmail network that could influence elections, legislation, and major business decisions. Why haven't you published this story? Marcus asked. Alex's expression darkened. Because I need proof that would hold up in court, and because 3 of my sources have ended up dead in the past year. Car accidents, heart attacks, suicides, all very convenient for the people who want this story to stay buried. She pulled out another folder, this one containing obituaries and police reports. Marcus recognized Dr. Whitmore's accident report among them, but there were others, a banker who had supposedly jumped from a hotel balcony, a government accountant who had died in a house fire, a technology executive whose private plane had crashed in bad weather. All of these people had access to information about financial transactions involving Shadow Haven Island or the people who visit there, Alex explained. And all of them died within months of beginning to ask questions about what they'd discovered. Marcus stared at the documents spread across the table, feeling the familiar weight of a complex investigation settling on his shoulders. But this wasn't like the cases he'd worked during his career. This involved people with the resources to make problems disappear permanently. People who operated in a world where money and influence could rewrite reality. "There's something else," Alex said quietly. "I think Dr. Whitmore faked his own death." She pulled out a police report and pointed to several inconsistencies. The body was badly damaged in the crash and fire, identified primarily through dental records. But Whitmore had extensive dental work done just 3 months before his death. New caps, crowns, the works. It would have been relatively simple to plant fake dental records. Marcus studied the report, his experienced eye-catching details that supported Alex's theory. "You think he's hiding? I think he discovered something so dangerous that he had to disappear to stay alive. And I think whatever he discovered is hidden somewhere that only someone with law enforcement experience could find it." The note that had come with the photograph suddenly made more sense. "Trust no one in uniform" wasn't just a warning about corrupt cops. It was a clue about where to find Whitmore's evidence, somewhere that would be familiar to a detective but not obvious to others. "I need to see Whitmore's office," Marcus said. "And his home. If he left evidence behind, it'll be somewhere that a cop would think to look but other people would miss." Alex nodded. "I can arrange that. But Marcus, you need to understand what you're getting into. These people have killed to protect their secrets, and they won't hesitate to kill again. Once we start down this path, there's no going back." Marcus thought about his quiet retirement in Millbrook, about the peaceful life he'd tried to build after Sarah's death. Then he thought about the faces in those photographs, about the power being wielded in secret, about all the people who might be suffering because justice had been bought and sold like any other commodity. "Some things are worth the risk," he said finally. "If we don't expose this, who will?" As they left the diner, Marcus noticed a black sedan that had been parked across the street when he arrived was gone. But another car, this one, a dark blue SUV, seemed to be positioned where it could watch both exits from the parking lot. His instincts, honed by decades of police work, told him they were already being watched. The investigation was no longer theoretical. Marcus Kane was officially back in the game, and the stakes had never been higher. Jonathan Whitmore's house stood empty and dark on Elm Street, in the affluent suburb of Riverside Heights, its windows boarded up and a "for sale" sign swaying in the evening breeze. Marcus Kane sat in his car across the street, studying the property and watching for any signs of surveillance. Alex Rodriguez was parked 2 blocks away, maintaining communication through encrypted messaging apps on their phones. It had taken them a week to arrange access to Whitmore's home. Alex's contacts in the real estate industry had provided them with the alarm codes and a legitimate reason to be inside. She was posing as a potential buyer, and Marcus was acting as her security consultant. It was thin cover, but it would have to do. The house was a large colonial-style home with a circular driveway and mature oak trees that provided natural cover from the street. Marcus noted the positions of the security cameras, the motion sensors, and the landscape lighting that would be activated by movement. Whoever had killed Whitmore, if indeed he was dead, would have known about his security measures. The realtor says the police finished their investigation 3 months ago. Alex's message appeared on his phone. All of Whitmore's personal belongings were removed by his estate, but the house still contains his furniture and office equipment. Marcus replied, "Moving in now, watch for company." He approached the house from the rear, using the shadows cast by the oak trees to remain invisible from the street. The back door was solid oak, with a deadbolt lock that would have been challenging for most people, but Marcus had learned lock-picking skills during his years in law enforcement. Within 2 minutes, he was inside. The house felt like a museum of a life interrupted. Whitmore's furniture remained exactly as he'd left it, covered now with a thin layer of dust. Family photographs still hung on the walls, images of Whitmore with his late wife, vacation pictures from happier times, professional photos from his university days. The kitchen still held the residue of his final meal, a coffee cup sitting unwashed in the sink. Marcus made his way to Whitmore's home office, a large room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive oak desk. This was where Whitmore had conducted his research, where he'd uncovered whatever secrets had led to his apparent death. If there were clues to be found, they would be here. The desk drawers had been searched, but not by professionals. Papers were shuffled, files were out of order, and several documents bore fingerprints that suggested hasty handling. The police investigation had been thorough but conventional. They'd been looking for evidence of suicide or signs of personal problems that might explain Whitmore's death. They hadn't been looking for hidden evidence of a conspiracy. Marcus began his search using techniques he'd developed during his career. He checked for hollow spaces behind bookshelves, examined picture frames for hidden compartments, and tested floorboards for loose sections. After an hour of methodical searching, he found what he was looking for. Behind a framed diploma from Johns Hopkins University, Whitmore had carved a small hiding place in the wall. Inside was a waterproof envelope containing a USB drive and a letter addressed to the detective who finds this. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he opened the letter. "If you are reading this, then my fears about Shadow Haven Island were justified. And I am likely dead. The USB drive contains 5 years of research into a blackmail operation that reaches the highest levels of government, business, and the judiciary. The people involved have the resources to eliminate anyone who threatens their secret, which is why I have taken steps to ensure my own survival." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Whitmore was alive. The letter continued, "I have established a new identity and am living in hiding until it becomes safe to reveal what I have discovered. The evidence on this drive will allow law enforcement to build a case against the Shadow Haven operation, but it must be handled carefully. Trust only those who have proven themselves incapable of corruption." The letter included detailed instructions for accessing the USB drive's encrypted files and a list of contacts who could be trusted with the information. At the bottom, Whitmore had written, "The gathering scheduled for the last weekend of this month will include several new victims. If possible, they must be warned before it's too late." Marcus plugged the USB drive into Whitmore's computer, which had been left connected to the internet. The drive contained hundreds of files, financial records, photographs, audio recordings, psychological profiles, and detailed documentation of the Shadow Haven operation. As Marcus scrolled through the contents, the scope of the conspiracy became clear. Shadow Haven Island was indeed the center of a sophisticated blackmail network, but it was more organized and far-reaching than even Alex had suspected. The operation was run by a man named Victor Ashworth, a billionaire with legitimate businesses in finance and technology who used his wealth and resources to manipulate world events through targeted blackmail. The files showed how the operation worked. Powerful individuals were invited to exclusive gatherings on Shadow Haven Island, where they were encouraged to engage in activities that would destroy their reputations if revealed publicly. Everything was recorded using hidden cameras and sophisticated surveillance equipment. The recordings were then used to control these individuals' decisions for years afterward. Marcus found audio files of phone conversations between Ashworth and various politicians, business leaders, and judges. In the recordings, Ashworth could be heard giving specific instructions about votes, business deals, and legal decisions. The people on the other end of the calls sounded defeated, trapped by their own compromising behavior. One file contained a complete guest list for upcoming gatherings, including the events scheduled for the following weekend. Marcus recognized several names: a Supreme Court justice, 2 senators, the CEO of a major media company, and several international business leaders. If Whitmore was right, these people were walking into a trap that would destroy their freedom to make independent decisions for the rest of their careers. But the most shocking discovery was a file labeled Insurance Policy. Inside were copies of recordings and photographs involving people who were already under Ashworth's control. The file revealed the true scope of the network: over 200 powerful individuals around the world who were being controlled through blackmail. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Alex. "Black sedan just drove by slowly. May have company soon." He quickly copied the most important files to his own encrypted drive and prepared to leave. But as he was shutting down Whitmore's computer, one final file caught his attention. A document titled "The Detective." Inside was a psychological profile that Whitmore had compiled about Marcus Kane himself. The profile was based on his law enforcement record, his reputation for integrity, and his history of pursuing difficult cases despite political pressure. At the bottom of the profile, Whitmore had written, "Detective Kane represents our best hope for exposing the Shadowhaven operation. His record suggests he cannot be bought, threatened, or discouraged from pursuing justice." Marcus realized that receiving the mysterious envelope had not been random. Whitmore had specifically chosen him to uncover this conspiracy, had researched his background and determined that he was one of the few people who could be trusted with such dangerous information. As he prepared to leave the house, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed Alex's number, but when he answered, a man's voice spoke instead. "Detective Kane, my name is Jonathan Whitmore. I believe you found my insurance policy. We need to meet immediately. There are lives at stake, and time is running out." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "How do I know you're really Whitmore? Because only the real Jonathan Whitmore would know that you found his files hidden behind his diploma from Johns Hopkins, and only he would know that you're standing in his office right now looking at a psychological profile he compiled about you." The voice was calm, intelligent, and carried the weight of someone who had been living in fear for months. "There's a coffee shop called the Daily Grind on Route 15, about 20 minutes from where you are now. Come alone and watch for surveillance. If this phone call is being monitored, we may both be dead by morning." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone in the darkness of Whitmore's office. Outside, he could hear a car engine idling. The black sedan Alex had warned him about was now parked across the street. Marcus turned off Whitmore's computer, pocketed the USB drive, and made his way to the back of the house. As he prepared to slip out the rear door, he realized that his quiet retirement was officially over. He was now a target of the same people who had tried to kill Jonathan Whitmore, and the only way forward was to expose their operation before they could silence him permanently. The truth about Shadowhaven Island was finally within reach, but reaching it might cost him everything. The Daily Grind coffee shop sat at the intersection of two lonely highways, its neon sign flickering against the dark November sky. Marcus Kane arrived 15 minutes early and parked where he could watch both entrances while maintaining a clear escape route. His service weapon felt heavy in its shoulder holster, a reminder that this meeting could easily turn into a life-or-death situation. At exactly 10 p.m., a man who looked like an older, more haggard version of Dr. Seifer, Jonathan Whitmore, entered the coffee shop. His hair had been dyed gray and he wore thick-framed glasses that changed the shape of his face, but his posture and mannerisms matched the photos Marcus had studied. This was either Whitmore himself or someone who had studied him very carefully. Marcus waited 5 minutes watching for any signs of surveillance before entering the coffee shop. The man who claimed to be Whitmore was sitting in a corner booth, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee. Up close, the stress of the past months was evident in his hollow cheeks and the dark circles under his eyes. "Dr. Whitmore, I presume?" Marcus said as he slid into the booth across from him. "Please, call me Jonathan. And thank you for coming, Detective Kane. I know the risks you're taking by being here." Whitmore's voice carried the educated accent Marcus remembered from news interviews, but there was a weariness to it that suggested months of living in fear. "Start from the beginning," Marcus said. "Why did you fake your death?" Whitmore glanced around the nearly empty coffee shop before answering. "I discovered something that threatened some of the most powerful people in the world. My research into psychological manipulation and control techniques led me to investigate patterns of behavior change among politicians and business leaders. What I found was a systematic blackmail operation centered on Shadowhaven Island." He pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus satellite images of the island, pointing to various structures. "Victor Ashworth purchased this island in 2015 and transformed it into what he calls a private retreat for influential individuals. In reality, it's a sophisticated blackmail operation. Ashworth invites carefully selected targets to the island, where they're encouraged to engage in activities that would destroy their careers if revealed publicly." Marcus studied the images, noting the strategic positioning of buildings and the elaborate security measures. How does he get them to participate? "Gradually and carefully," Whitmore explained. "First, targets are invited to legitimate business or political gatherings on the island. The accommodations are luxurious, the company impressive, and everything appears completely above board. But during these visits, Ashworth and his associates study their targets, identifying weaknesses, desires, and psychological vulnerabilities. He scrolled to another set of images, showing what appeared to be a sophisticated entertainment complex. Subsequent invitations become more elaborate. Targets are introduced to increasingly compromising situations, often involving alcohol, drugs, or sexual activities. Every moment is recorded using hidden cameras throughout the facilities. Marcus felt sick as the implications became clear. Once they have the recordings, the targets become assets, Whitmore finished. Ashworth doesn't make crude demands for money. Instead, he requests favors, votes on specific legislation, business deals that benefit his interests, legal decisions that protect his network. The targets comply because exposure would mean the end of their careers, their marriages, and their reputations. Whitmore showed Marcus financial records from his tablet. I was able to trace millions of dollars in payments to various individuals who helped facilitate the operation. Judges who ensured that investigations never proceeded. Politicians who blocked legislation that would have exposed offshore financial networks. Business leaders who provided resources and cover. How did you get access to all this information? I was hired as a consultant, Whitmore explained. Ashworth wanted to understand the psychological profiles of potential targets, how to identify their weaknesses, and exploit them most effectively. He thought he was hiring a researcher who would help him improve his operation. Instead, he gave me access to everything. Marcus leaned forward. Why haven't you taken this to the FBI? Whitmore's expression darkened, because several FBI officials are on Ashworth's list of compromised assets. The same is true for the CIA, local police departments, and prosecutors' offices. The network is so extensive that I couldn't be sure who to trust. He pulled up another file on his tablet, this one showing a complex organizational chart. Ashworth has been building this network for over a decade. He has assets in every major law enforcement agency, in both political parties, in the media, and in the business world. When I realized the scope of the operation, I knew that exposing it would require someone outside the system, someone with the skills to investigate but without institutional loyalties that could be compromised. That's why you chose me. Your reputation precedes you, Detective Kane. 35 years of service without a single corruption allegation, multiple commendations for pursuing difficult cases despite political pressure, and a track record of exposing wrongdoing even when it involved powerful people. You were the obvious choice. Marcus thought about the USB drive in his pocket, containing evidence that could bring down hundreds of powerful individuals. What's your plan? The next gathering on Shadowhaven Island is scheduled for this weekend, Whitmore explained. Ashworth has invited 12 new targets, including Supreme Court Justice Margaret Chen, Senator Robert Harrison, and tech billionaire David Park. If we can't stop this gathering, 12 more powerful people will fall under Ashworth's control. He showed Marcus surveillance photos of the potential targets. These people have no idea what they're walking into. Justice Chen thinks she's attending a legal conference. Senator Harrison believes he's going to a fundraising event. Park thinks it's a technology summit. They're all flying to Nassau tomorrow, where Ashworth's private jet will transport them to the island. Can't we warn them? I've tried, Whitmore said grimly. But Ashworth's network includes people close to all of these targets. My attempts to warn them were intercepted, and now Ashworth knows I'm alive. That's why this meeting is so dangerous for both of us. As if summoned by his words, Marcus noticed 2 black SUVs pulling into the coffee shop's parking lot. The vehicles positioned themselves to block both exits, and men in dark clothing began getting out. Time to go, Marcus said, standing quickly, but Whitmore grabbed his arm. Wait, there's something else you need to know. He pressed a second USB drive into Marcus's hand. This contains everything. All of my research, all of the evidence, and the locations of backup copies I've hidden around the country. But more importantly, it contains the access codes for Shadowhaven Island's security system. Marcus stared at the drive. You want me to go to the island? It's the only way to get evidence that will hold up in court, Whitmore explained urgently. Everything else can be dismissed as fabricated or obtained illegally. But if you can get onto the island during the gathering this weekend, you can record everything that happens. The evidence will be undeniable. The men from the SUVs were approaching the coffee shop entrance. Marcus counted at least 6 individuals, all moving with the coordinated precision of professional security personnel. "There's a service exit through the kitchen," Whitmore said. "I'll create a distraction. Get to your car and get out of here. The USB drive contains instructions for reaching the island and contacts who can help you. Whatever happens to me, you have to stop this weekend's gathering." Before Marcus could respond, Whitmore stood and walked toward the front of the coffee shop, directly toward the approaching men. Marcus heard him call out, "Gentlemen, I believe you're looking for me," as he slipped through the service door into the kitchen. The coffee shop erupted in shouting voices as Marcus made his way through the kitchen and out the back exit. He could hear Whitmore arguing with the men, his voice calm and defiant even in the face of certain capture or death. By the time Marcus reached his car, he could see flashlights moving around the building and hear the sound of vehicles starting. As he drove away, Marcus realized that Jonathan Whitmore had just sacrificed his freedom and possibly his life to ensure that the evidence would reach someone who could act on it. The weight of that responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a lead blanket. In 36 hours, 12 powerful individuals would board a private jet for what they thought was a routine business gathering. Instead, they would be walking into a trap that would destroy their ability to make independent decisions for the rest of their lives. Marcus Kane was now the only person who could stop it. The USB drive in his pocket contained the tools he would need to infiltrate Shadowhaven Island, but using those tools would mean putting his own life at risk. As he drove through the dark countryside, Marcus thought about his wife Sarah, about the quiet retirement he was abandoning, and about the innocent people who were counting on him to do the right thing. Justice, he had learned long ago, often demanded a price. Tomorrow, he would find out just how much he was willing to pay. The speedboat cut through the dark Caribbean waters toward Shadowhaven Island, its engine muffled by the sound dampener Marcus had installed during his hurried preparations in Nassau. It was 2 a.m. on Saturday morning, and the gathering that would ensnare 12 new victims was scheduled to begin in just 10 hours. Marcus had less than 8 hours to infiltrate the island, gather irrefutable evidence, and escape before dawn revealed his presence. Alex Rodriguez's voice crackled through his earpiece from her position aboard a chartered fishing boat 2 miles away. "Security patrol just passed your position heading north. You should have a clear approach to the service dock on the eastern shore." Marcus adjusted his night vision goggles and studied the island's shoreline. Shadowhaven looked deceptively peaceful in the moonlight, its palm trees swaying gently in the ocean breeze, and its structures dark against the star-filled sky. But Marcus knew that beneath this tropical paradise lay one of the most sophisticated criminal operations he had ever encountered. Using the access codes from Whitmore's USB drive, Marcus had been able to study the island's security systems and identify the one weakness in Ashworth's defenses, a small service dock used for supply deliveries that was monitored by only 2 cameras and had minimal patrol coverage during the early morning hours. If he could reach that dock undetected, he could access the island's underground service tunnels and make his way to the main facility. The boat glided silently into the small harbor, and Marcus quickly secured it to the dock. According to Whitmore's intelligence, the main gathering would take place in the entertainment complex at the center of the island, a sprawling facility that included conference rooms, private suites, and the recording equipment used to capture compromising activities. Marcus's mission was to plant surveillance devices in key locations and document whatever happened during the weekend's activities. He made his way along a service path that led from the dock toward the main complex, using his night vision equipment to navigate while avoiding the security cameras Whitmore had mapped for him. The island was larger than it appeared in the photographs, with dense tropical vegetation that provided natural cover but also concealed potential threats. After 20 minutes of careful movement, Marcus reached the service entrance to the underground tunnel system. The access code from Whitmore's drive worked perfectly, and Marcus found himself in a climate-controlled corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. Emergency lighting provided just enough illumination to navigate, and the hum of air conditioning equipment masked any sounds his movement might make. The tunnel system was extensive, connecting every building on the island and providing access to maintenance areas, storage facilities, and the central security control room. Marcus followed Whitmore's detailed maps toward the entertainment complex, stopping periodically to plant wireless surveillance devices in locations that would capture both audio and video of the weekend's activities. As he moved through the tunnels, Marcus discovered evidence that confirmed Whitmore's worst fears about the operation's scope. Storage rooms contained thousands of files on potential blackmail targets, complete with psychological profiles, financial information, and detailed plans for compromising each individual. Another room held recording equipment and editing facilities that could produce professional-quality blackmail materials. But the most disturbing discovery was a secure facility that appeared to be a private medical clinic. According to the files Marcus found there, Ashworth's operation included drugging targets to make them more compliant and to ensure they had limited memory of their compromising activities. Several medical professionals were on Ashworth's payroll, providing both the drugs and the expertise needed to control targets without leaving obvious evidence. Marcus photographed everything he could and copied files to encrypted storage devices, building a comprehensive record of the operation. But he knew that documentation alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to capture the actual blackmail process in action to provide evidence that would convince prosecutors and juries. At 6 a.m., Marcus positioned himself in a maintenance space above the main conference room, where Whitmore's intelligence indicated the weekend's activities would begin. Through a carefully concealed observation point, he could see the luxurious room being prepared for the arriving guests. Staff members were setting up cameras disguised as decorative elements, testing recording equipment, and ensuring that every angle of the room would be covered. By 8 a.m., the first guests were arriving via helicopter from Nassau. Marcus watched through his surveillance equipment as Supreme Court Justice Margaret Chen stepped onto the island's landing pad, followed by Senator Robert Harrison and tech billionaire David Park. The other guests arrived throughout the morning, business leaders, media executives, and political figures who had no idea they were walking into a trap that would destroy their independence forever. Victor Ashworth himself was an imposing figure. Tall, silver-haired, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from unlimited wealth and power. Marcus watched him greeting each guest personally, his demeanor warm and welcoming as he guided them toward their accommodations. To any outside observer, this looked like a typical gathering of powerful individuals at an exclusive retreat. The first day's activities appeared completely legitimate. Business discussions, presentations about various investment opportunities, and social gatherings that allowed the guests to network with each other. But Marcus noticed subtle details that revealed the trap being set. Drinks were served from specially marked bottles, meals were prepared using ingredients that could mask the taste of certain drugs, and conversations were gradually steered toward topics that revealed each guest's personal vulnerabilities. By evening, the atmosphere had changed noticeably. The guests appeared more relaxed, their inhibitions lowered by whatever substances had been added to their food and drinks. Ashworth began introducing additional entertainment options, attractive companions, recreational activities that pushed ethical boundaries, and situations designed to compromise the guests gradually and systematically. Marcus recorded everything, his surveillance equipment capturing clear evidence of the systematic drugging and manipulation of the targets. But as the evening progressed, he realized that documenting the crime wasn't enough. He had to prevent it from reaching its conclusion. At 11 p.m., Marcus made his decision. Using his knowledge of the island's systems, he triggered the fire suppression system in the entertainment complex, flooding the area with foam and forcing an immediate evacuation. In the chaos that followed, he activated the emergency communication system and broadcast a message throughout the island. This is Detective Marcus Kane of the Baltimore Police Department. The FBI has been notified of criminal activities taking place on this island. All guests should evacuate immediately via the helicopters standing by. This facility is under investigation for conspiracy, drugging, and blackmail operations. The announcement caused immediate panic. Ashworth's security personnel began searching for the source of the broadcast while the guests, many of whom were still disoriented from the drugs, demanded immediate transportation off the island. Within an hour, helicopters were evacuating the confused and frightened targets back to Nassau. But Marcus knew his work wasn't finished. As the island emptied of guests, he made his way to Ashworth's private office in the main house, where Whitmore's intelligence indicated the master files for the entire operation were kept. These files would contain evidence linking the blackmail network to hundreds of powerful individuals around the world. He found Ashworth waiting for him in the office, sitting calmly behind his massive desk with his hands folded. "Detective Kane, I've been expecting you. Dr. Whitmore spoke highly of your investigative abilities before we were forced to eliminate him. Marcus felt a cold rage building in his chest. Where is Whitmore? Dead, I'm afraid. A regrettable necessity, but he had become too dangerous to our operation. Ashworth gestured to a chair across from his desk. Please, sit. We have much to discuss. Marcus remained standing, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. The only thing we're going to discuss is your surrender. The FBI is on their way, and I have enough evidence to put you away for life. Ashworth smiled coldly. I think you'll find that's unlikely, Detective. You see, many of the people you would need to prosecute me are already under my control. Federal judges, prosecutors, FBI officials, they all have reasons to ensure that I remain free and my operation continues. He opened a laptop on his desk and turned it toward Marcus. On the screen was a video file showing a federal judge in a compromising situation on Shadow Haven Island. Would you like to see how we convinced Judge Patricia Williams to rule in our favor on 17 separate cases? Or perhaps you'd prefer to view Senator Harrison's activities from his last visit here? Marcus realized that even with all his evidence, prosecuting Ashworth would be nearly impossible if key figures in the justice system were compromised, but he had prepared for this possibility. That's why I'm not relying on the traditional justice system, Marcus said, pulling out a satellite phone. In exactly 30 minutes, copies of everything I've discovered will be released simultaneously to news organizations around the world. Video evidence, financial records, the complete list of compromised officials, all of it. Ashworth's confident expression faltered. You're bluffing. Alex Rodriguez has been coordinating with investigative journalists in 12 countries. The story is already written and ready for publication. The only way to stop it is with a code that I send every 30 minutes. If I don't send that code, Marcus checked his watch, the story goes public in 27 minutes. For the first time, Ashworth looked genuinely concerned. What do you want? I want you to release every person under your control. I want you to destroy all the blackmail materials. And I want you to surrender yourself to authorities who aren't compromised by your operation. Ashworth stood slowly, his hands shaking slightly. You have no idea what you're asking. The people under our control include heads of state, Supreme Court justices, business leaders who control trillions of dollars. Releasing them would destabilize governments and financial markets around the world. Then maybe the world needs to be destabilized, Marcus replied. Maybe it's time for people to know that their leaders have been compromised. The standoff lasted several tense minutes before Ashworth finally nodded. Very well, Detective. You've won this round. But understand that destroying our operation won't eliminate the corruption it was designed to exploit. Power will always find ways to maintain itself. As dawn broke over Shadow Haven Island, Marcus Kane stood watching as FBI agents who had been secretly coordinating with Alex Rodriguez took Victor Ashworth into custody. The sun rising over the Caribbean waters seemed to symbolize a new beginning, a world where powerful people might finally be held accountable for their actions. But as he prepared to leave the island, Marcus knew that his work was far from finished. The evidence he had gathered would lead to investigations around the world, prosecutions that would take years to complete, and revelations that would shake the foundations of governments and institutions everywhere. Jonathan Whitmore had paid the ultimate price to expose the truth about Shadow Haven Island. Now it was up to Marcus Kane and others like him to ensure that Whitmore's sacrifice had not been in vain. Justice, Marcus had learned, was not a destination. It was a journey that required constant vigilance and the courage to confront darkness wherever it tried to hide. As his boat carried him away from Shadow Haven Island for the last time, Marcus reflected on the words his wife Sarah had spoken during his darkest cases. Some fights choose the fighter, Marcus. When that happens, running away isn't an option. The fight for justice would continue, and Marcus Kane would be there to answer when it called his name.